When first-person shooting games are brought up, I notice Crysis is left off a lot of lists a great deal of the time. It's astonishing, really, until you realize that what Crysis 1 tried to do was simulate an entire first-person shooter in a jungle environment while effectively having the CPU attempt to get all the prime numbers all at the same time. The fact is, the game did amazing stuff, but its performance was always rough. There's a reason why. The joke always goes out there. Can it run Crysis? Crysis 2 and 3 came along, and they offered their own spins on the original game, and actually scored very well, and were far more technically proficient in how they ran. And then we heard about Crysis Remastered. Was it going to have the same issues, or was it going to bring the technology into the future? No, it was not. It had a lot of the same problems with performance. That is, until the 1.30 patch came out for Remastered. And honestly, Crysis Remastered, Crysis Remastered 2, and Crysis Remastered 3 available coming up soon for the PlayStation, Xbox, and PC surprisingly perform like all of them have that patch. And that is only good news for all of us. Good news for you. Let's start the review. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. And I'll give a thumbs up to Crysis 1 and its original location, that jungle's slow descent into chaos, as you use the destruction system to annihilate entire villages. I love that original game, sneaking through the jungle and taking out enemies. It was so fantastic as a sandbox. But I also have my love for Crysis 2 and Crysis 3. They did things a little bit differently, especially with their levels and how they did it. The bleached out, destroyed cities and later locations of the second one as that blossomed out into some truly spectacular locales, or 3. Some would say the best mix of the bunch when it comes to the level makeup, because it extracted the linear parts of that second title, opened it up with a truly gorgeous raging storm moment on a military ocean vessel to open that game. It's just a spectacular opening. All of these games have something about them that I actually like. I also like the animations for enemies. Hitting an enemy, they'll fall over. If you surprise them, they'll trip up. That is a really cool way to sell the gamer on just a little bit of fiction that these are real characters reacting to you. And while all these games were impressive originally, they do step it up hugely in the remaster. From the lighting system, which is phenomenal, and you can see that global illumination, the ray tracing on the PC. Really, regardless of whatever setting you put it on, all the way down to low, the game still looks very good. Explosions and lighting, debris systems all work crazy. When it comes to the performance, Crysis Remastered 1 is much improved, though 60 locked without leaping into the settings on the PC is still a bit hard pressed. The step up in that patch is incredible. It is nothing like it was when it originally came out. Crysis 2 and 3 Remastered built upon the excellent bases of the original titles, and the remasters here have done them an incredible service. Let's talk about the consoles for a second. This is pretty mind-blowing. They're locked 60 FPS on the consoles pretty much all across the board except for the older generation. So the PS4 and the Xbox One, they're locked at 30, but the way the game handles the actual blur shader is fucking phenomenal. You're not going to win an argument if you try to say 60 is worse than 30, but this is one of the best locked at 30 FPS games I've seen in a long time. You jump into the next gen consoles, guess what? Locked 60. Occasional streaming issues would pop up where you get it to drop a little bit. Highly impressive, especially when you add in that all new lighting systems have been built into these remasters. With the PC, you can jump in with a 1080 and a 1080 Ti, and you can get yourself 1080p with most of those settings on high or ultra. You will have to use some DLSS. This game does have some various settings that you can turn down and get some FPS back for sure. In particular, post-processing and a separate shading that actually is in there. You can definitely get some FPS back from there. It's rare that you get a game that was technically as proficient as these were, and you see the remasters, and we've seen demasters, Batman demastered, where the goddamn remasters looked worse. And here, very good frame rates and is performant as hell.
Targets. Intel. You do the fun stuff.
That's not the Psycho I used to know.
Things change.
All of the music in this game rocks. Some of it was worked on by Zimmer, and you can tell it's very synth heavy. It's got a horror vibe, which especially in the title sequences and in the main exploration areas really, really works. It lends an alien vibe to almost everything that's occurring, no matter what you're doing, no matter when you're doing it. You will always think or feel something slightly off kilter is going on in the Crysis games. And that's exactly what they want you to feel. That horror vibe isn't always present overarching or very heavily atmospheric. It's just there. It's assured. A number of other styles of music do appear in the various tracks for all three games, but across all three titles, I've been surprised how cohesive the soundtracks actually are. They're also purely atmospherically magnificent. There is a reason why whenever you go to talk about OSTs, if somebody mentions the Crysis games, you have a number of people jumping up and saying, oh my God, I forgot that title. It's easy to forget them because they are first-person shooters, and a lot of the times you don't get a chance to listen. But here, I would say, please do so. Speaking of listening, the sound here, remembering that these games have stretched over many years, and while technically a lot has changed, it hasn't advanced to the point where all the samples and audio are perfect. I have to say, I like the second game's audio better. Sliding into the city blocks and easing up behind some of the enemies and going loud, there's something tonally that sounds a little bit better in the guns and their trailing off sounds that you hear, the reverberation that you hear, not necessarily the occlusion. It could just be the urban areas are making up a good deal of those games, though of course you do branch out a bit later. I'm not sure. Regardless, they're actually all sounding good with accurate environmentals. Crysis, audio, sound, music are great. When it comes to the voices, it's true when you think about a Crysis game, the game has an odd narrative slant. Prophet and Alcatraz are never really the crux of the story themselves, even though they appear to be if you don't pay a lot of attention. They're cool kids invited to the party, though, to get clout. No one really wants them there. The tech that they have, they want that. The power that they have, sure, they want that. He's the Goldberg of characters, though. There's just no range whatsoever. It's not really about that. Despite having no range, I think the voices are done pretty well, and especially in one of the games when you team up with a prior teammate, that was very cool. I think it was handled really well. I may not always agree with the tone or the theme that the story beat is on, but I can't sit here and say that they don't try to do it. It can be a little bit over the top, but that's not necessarily so bad in a first-person shooter. What is bad sometimes is story. We're going to talk about gameplay and story right now. Sit on back. Let's Lego block this sucker together. I'm going to do it without any spoilers if I can. Crysis as a trilogy is about soldiers' first contact with, fighting against, and investigating an alien menace. I do want to point out that while I know some people didn't like the stories of these games, I felt like Crysis 3 in particular was pretty dark and actually effective in making me care for some of these characters, if not slightly inspired. Dealing with PTSD, the stripping of power from those who are accustomed to it and don't really deserve it to be stripped from them, and the movement forward of the entire showcase, which is the aliens themselves, is pretty impressive. I don't want to put too much into it. It's not a tale of two cities told through a super soldier's eyes or anything. It's just not terrible. Regardless of the title, whichever of these three you're playing, you are playing a Crysis game, which means it's a first-person shooter first and foremost. While the first title is an open island game, though there's a little bit of bookending in that title, 2 and 3 are more contained. Regardless of where you are almost always doing the same thing, shooting people, utilizing your powered suit to get from one waypoint to the other, even if getting there is a wide open space or a tunnel. Luckily, it handles the shooting and exploring really well. Shooting in the games is all fairly spot on with good recoil and feel, and while each title has some overlap in the weaponry, they also each have their own specific ones in the games as well. Sometimes a game won't have a gun that you may like, the other might. You can usually carry just a couple weapons as well as an assortment of side items like grenades. You will find yourself looking through enemies' guns a lot in these games and trying to find the ones that best suit you, as some of these guns can't take certain attachments and mods like others can, and the guns are actually quite important because while you do have the suit, which I'll talk about in a second, it is not technically super overpowered. Well, it is a bit overpowered, but not always for just doing damage to enemies. Many times the suit and their skills is more of the defensive, while the weapons that you have, of course, reach out and, well, kill people. I love customizing this game when it comes to the weapons. It's not crazy. Your bow may have some broadheads and you can choose how much power it takes to pull it back, which indicates how much fall off it'll have or how long it takes to actually aim. On most of the guns, you can put a silencer or a hollow dot and extended clip on them. It could be slicker. It does feel a little bit older style. The suit powers themselves, because the game's changed a bit with how each one is done, they separate and then combine and then sort of continue to combine and separate as you go through. Even how you unlock them changes between 1, 2, and 3. I'll just sort of smash it together and say that each of the titles offers many of the same powers, including jump and speed, invisibility, strength, armor, and others. And of course, you unlock those as you get suit points for various things you do in the games. It's that mix, though, of those guns and their loadouts that make the combat in the titles work so well. While the enemies aren't exactly smart, many times they have an assortment of weapons as well to take you out, and you can actually find it easy to run out of bullets on some of these guns and need to scramble around, which is where the suit can pop up, maybe powering up its overpowered armor to make a sprint to an ammo box, or flicking into invisibility to flank the enemies and maybe try to sneak by and kill somebody. One thing that makes Crysis enjoyable is, for the most part, the enemies do continue to react to you where they last saw you versus where you are now. Meaning, they can be attacking to the north, but you're already fast like a freak around the trees or through an open window, and now you're behind them. It tends to lend a bit of believability that the characters don't always know where you're moving to. Control in the game works really well, mouse and keyboard or gamepad, and on any system. It can get a bit busy though, especially with that HUD, when you're dropping your mask's HUD to seek out people in the locations, then marking them, then marking weapons or caches or other things you want to pay attention to, then switching to night sights. Or one of my favorite is where you can actually look around the game world and the suit will point out different places where there's a climbable ledge or a flanking spot. And while I ignore those most of the time, the fact that you can have them pointed out, but they are not so gamified that you have to do those places. And I do wish, when it came to things you could do, that the stealth was always ace, but it's not. Let's face it, this series has gone back and forth on how it wants to handle stealth, and it never hits it perfectly. Regardless, basically I have one title that's got sort of a normal style, I guess, stealth system where enemies are a bit like a typical game, and then you have the two others where if you're not using your invisibility suit power, enemies can see you pretty easily. I don't mean instantly, well, sometimes, but movement and sound are magnified, and it can be very cumbersome at first. Now, I have always stated I hate enemies that let you just walk up to them. They're supposed to be highly trained soldiers. Why are they not noticing me? Sometimes you're not supposed to wish for something and get it. It does revolve around soldiers and aliens with hyper awareness and superhuman skills that you are fighting against, but it certainly can feel very actively engaged against you. It's an acquired taste though, and since the invisibility is based on power draw, it can be a bit finicky with using the suits and the skills. I liked that, where I had to identify exactly how much energy I was going to use in the invisibility and where I was going to go. And then when you're upgrading that particular skill, having to decide, hey, do I want to upgrade this or do I want to upgrade the armor? And if you upgrade the armor, then that means there are going to be places where you can't sneak between two locations without being seen because your invisibility will go away. Sadly, as the remasters have come out, we are informed that the multiplayer is not included in these, which sucks because much like Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, the game and that mode added a great deal combined together. Still though, 3 titles in this package, a lot of gameplay in here. Of course, if there's a lot of gameplay and it sucks, no one's going to care, but luckily this doesn't. The trilogy is pretty much where it's at when it comes to enjoyable first-person shooting, and it reminds me many times when I'm playing it of how much sometimes I do like a game that isn't necessarily as open world as a lot of other games, but maybe is a hub-based, and you get all 3 tastes in this trilogy. Each is within the same world. It has its familiar tropes, but they handle the world in a different way each time, and it may not be the most amazing story, but its gunplay is a blast, and it's basically murder vacations with you going to the nicest place in the world to kill everybody who's there. And it's just that mix of cybernetics and hard gun gameplay. The title never leaps fully into alien weapons tech, but it offers just a couple moments where you get to use it, as well as the suit, that consistently makes you hoping there's something else out there that you might be able to grab and shoot somebody with. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. You guys can tell this is a buy. Yes, it's missing the multiplayer, which sucks. And the original game has a lot of textures. It looks like some old grandpa didn't put his glasses on before verifying that they were okay to shove into the game. But what we have is a fun shooter that's enjoyable. It's got different styles of enemies on each one that handle things just a little bit differently, but they all tell a contained tale. A tale that is worth experimenting with and jumping into at this time. It's not a blow your socks off kind of first-person shooter where you're going to get done with these three and say, these are the best shooters ever. What they are is very solid shooters with very, very good graphics and really enjoyable gunplay. And I can tell you right now, that actually seems sort of rare. Speaking of rare, it's rare for me to do a review under 17 minutes. So here we go. If you like the video, thumbs up. If you dislike the video, thumbs down. Check out the Patreon. Podcast is 10:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I would love for you to show up. That's how you guys can support me and support the channel. Reviews where I get a copy, even if it's from the dev, and I buy a copy and give it away to somebody in the podcast. I hope you guys have an awesome week. Share this everywhere you can. Peace out.